Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do one of my first chapter reads. I quite like doing these videos. What I do basically is to take a selection of books and read a sample from Amazon, so I get the first chapter or prologue and first chapter as applicable of the books to get a bit of a taste for the writing style and the story and see if I can find a new favourite that I want to continue on with. So for this one, I decided to take some input from my Patreon group. I asked them to nominate a science fiction or a fantasy book for me to do this for. And although not everyone did nominate a book for me to read, I do have 7 to go through in this video. So let's get into it. Now, the one thing that I didn't do here is write down in my little set of notes who nominated each of these books. So I'm going to do my best to remember who nominated each of these, but I'm going to start out in the order that I read them. So what I also did is I listed down the 7 books, and then I asked in my Discord for people to just pick a number 1 to 7 and kept going until 6 had been selected, and I read in that order. So the first one that I got to was Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young, which was nominated by Terry. And this one is kind of a Viking or Viking-esque story, and it's one that did quite interest me. Although I don't read historical fiction, I do like kind of Norse-inspired fantasy every now and then. So this one was a little bit strange. It starts off, you've got a warrior woman and she's with her battle mate. She's kind of getting dressed ready for battle. She's getting her armor on and so forth. And then they go into battle, the two of them side by side. And that's not necessarily unusual. You do tend to get that, but I thought it was quite well done in this particular one, because normally what you get is a group of friends and they end up fighting together, or they always fight together, and they just do that because they know each other. Whereas this one, it seems like it's more organised and people are actually paired off and they train together, they know each other, and they fight as one unit rather than 2 individuals. So I quite like that, and you do get a good bit of battle to start off the book to really showcase the skills of these 2 women. So we get to the point in this one where there's it seems like a magical fog and they can't really see the enemy, and then the fog clears and they get into battle with them. And our main character is eventually overwhelmed and she's about to be killed by someone, but then somebody else from the opposing side kind of knocks the guy out of the way, tells him not to kill her, and that's where it gets a little bit confusing, because she recognises this person and it turns out that it's actually her brother who is saving her life. And the odd bit about that is the last time she saw her brother was about 5 years ago and he was dead. So it's an opening that doesn't really tell us a vast amount, but it is definitely quite intriguing. There's a bit of a hook there. I'm definitely interested to find out why this dead brother is actually alive and what he's doing fighting on the opposing side. So because of that, and because I got on well with the writing, it's definitely one that I feel that I could continue with. Next up was the Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah, which was recommended to me by Jord, if I remember correctly. This is a book that I had been interested in anyway, because I've heard a lot of good things about it. We start off here with a prologue, and it's a story being told kind of about the history of this world and the jinn and how they essentially got into their power, became the most powerful beings, and then that power kind of corrupted them and they ended up destroying their entire civilization and disappearing from the earth. There are some jinn who remain, however, and at the end of the prologue, the end of the story, there's a line added onto it by the main character's mother who is telling the story, and she says basically that not all jinn are bad. Then we get into the first chapter and we've got the main character who has a jinn kind of bodyguard, so I guess that's where we're finding out that not all jinn are bad. And they're going onto a ship to do a trade basically. And you've got a guy who is blind in one eye, and he's trading them this elixir which heals his eye basically, which we learn is very easy for our main character to come by because it is essentially just blood from a jinn. So he takes this elixir and it heals his eye and he can see again. And that's kind of where we finish up that little section of chapter 1. Now, I did finish at that point rather than continuing. Chapter 1 did carry on for quite a bit longer. It was quite a long chapter, but I felt that I had enough of a grasp of the kind of writing style and the kind of the theme and the events of the book from that prologue and then the opening of chapter 1. So it was an okay one. It's one that didn't kind of really grasp me, but it is all the same one that I feel comfortable enough coming back to at a later point. Then we've got one that I kind of cheated on because I read the opening of The 13th Hour by Trudy Skies. This one technically wasn't nominated, but I know L.L. McRae really wants me to read this one. We've spoken about it a couple of times in the past, and it is one that I was interested in. So I kind of took it as a recommendation that was given previously rather than specifically for this task. Now this one starts off with some kind of introductory extras telling us a little bit about the world and the different people, the kind of rules of the land, I think it is. And then chapter 1 starts and you've got a couple of people who are running after a tram that they've missed. They need to get to the final destination essentially of where this tram was going to, and then go onto an elevator up to the kind of top world, if you like, and then they go in there to start their day job, which is in a tea shop, I think it is. So it sounds kind of mundane, really, but it is definitely not mundane. Part of the reason that they are rushing isn't just so they make sure they're not late to work. Before work, they've got to deliver some forged documents to some illegal immigrants, basically. And they've got a very limited window before these people need those documents to avoid being, I guess, deported. And it sounds quite interesting in the way that this is all set out. There's a lot of kind of backstory that's just given to you and hinted to you in quite a nice way, so it doesn't overload you with all of the information. You get various instances of meeting people and seeing that they are very, very different rather than just being human, and I do definitely like that. So although it's a relatively simple setup, I feel that there's quite a lot of world building in this one already, but it's not what I would call kind of regular world building, where there's a largely Earth-like world, and then there's basically humans, and then the occasional non-human species thrown in there as well. This is one that feels like it's been properly built from the ground upwards, and it's very well and lovingly put together, and there's a lot to appreciate within this opening chapter. It does feel like it's not my usual type of fantasy, but I feel like it could be my type of book. Next up was Arlena, who nominated me to read The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. And this is one that, although I go into these type of experiments, if you like, with an open mind, this is a book that I was probably looking forward to the least out of the 7 that I've got to go through. So with this one, we start off with an old man who's dying. He's in a hospital and he's basically on his deathbed, and he's visited by a schoolgirl who tells him that the world is ending, or not necessarily that the world is ending because he knows that, but that it's ending faster than perhaps they'd previously known. And she asks him to pass on that message. It's a message that's passed on from child to adult throughout the years, which seems a little bit strange, and it just adds to the kind of weirdness of this opening. Now, it was a very short opening chapter, so I also read the second chapter as well, and within that one we go to a bit of a autobiography, really, of the main character. We learn about the circumstances of his birth and of his family, and then we go through and describe basically various different relatives that he's got. And for me, I don't like reading autobiographies. I don't read any non-fiction whatsoever. And this one, although it's fiction, it was definitely kind of set out in the form of an autobiography, at least in this opening kind of chapter or two. So I didn't really enjoy it, partly because it's not my style of writing, and partly, I guess, because although, as I said, I go into it with an open mind, I think subconsciously I knew that I didn't really want to read this one, and I don't know how much that impacted my potential enjoyment of these opening chapters, although I will caveat that and say that they definitely were not my type of opening chapters, so maybe that just backed up my prejudice. Book number 5, I think we're on now, was Master of Sorrows by Justine Cole, which was nominated by Wise Stitch. And this one is one that I've heard a lot about. I've heard a lot of good things about it, but I've not really looked into it that much myself. So, like with most of these, I definitely went into this one quite blind. Now, it was slightly differently set out, I suppose, because we had a prologue, then part 1, and there was like a couple of pages of story underneath that, and then there was chapter 1 following that as well. So I did have a little bit of reading for this one, but that was fine because I was finding that the writing style was quite engrossing, the story was quite interesting, so I didn't really mind that. Now, the one thing I will say is, although you do often get this when you go blind into reading a book, I was definitely quite confused reading this opening. So you've got a baby being born, and the baby has only got one hand, which presumably is kind of a known sign of what I learned to be the god of death, or some equivalent to the god of death. So what happens in that instance is the baby is taken away and left to be fed on by agents of this god. I think it's kind of like wolves or some other beasts in the forests around this village. The mother and the father of the baby are killed as being vessels of this god, so it's quite a bloody and brutal opening. Within kind of the birth intent, though, when the father comes in and he's learning what's happened, you've got this priest who kind of gives him the eye and tries to say wordlessly, "Don't worry, I won't let them kill your baby." And you've then got two of the wit women who are present who take the baby away to be fed on by these beasts. The two wit women are very different. One of them turns out to be an agent of this god of death, and she's trying to take the baby away because she's been waiting for the birth of this particular baby. They get into a fight and she is knocked down. The younger of the two, who is definitely trying to have this baby killed, she is left in a briar patch essentially, with the thorns really digging into her. And then the priest, who was giving the father the eye, he turns up and takes the baby away and sort of overpowers the older of the wit women. So there's quite a lot going on. It's a little bit confusing. My memory and my words are really not combining very well to describe this one nice and concisely for you, so I apologise for that. It is a very strange one. There's lots of interesting ideas and there's lots of mystery there, and there's lots of questions that I feel like I want to know the answers to. So in that sense, it does a good job as an opening to the book. Okay, so the sixth book that I read was nominated by Palmer Pickering. This is Iron Truth by S.A. Folin, and this was the winner of the SPSFC competition, so the self-published science fiction competition, as a sister competition, if you like, to SPFBO. So as the winner of the first iteration of that competition, this one already has good pedigree, and I was looking forward to reading it. The opening really put me in mind of something like Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. You've got a brother and a sister. The brother is the head of security on a colony ship that is leaving Mars, and the sister is someone who wouldn't normally get a place on that ship because she's got, I think they call it Mars lung. She's got a medical condition basically that would normally preclude her, and her test scores aren't good enough to get past that and get her a place on the ship. So the brother pulls some strings and gets her on the ship, and then basically he's putting her into cryosleep, and then she wakes up what feels like seconds later but is actually quite a bit later. Now they're supposed to be travelling for, I think it's something like 5 years to get to their final destination, but something has obviously gone wrong and they've woken up 119 years later. Now, the person who wakes up the main character is someone who is very far down the list of priority for the computer to awaken if there's been a problem. So that tells us straight away that we're in a bit of a dire situation. So he's awakened the main character because she's quite small and she can climb through the air vents to get to the other side because they can't get out of the room that they are in. So she goes off and does that, and there's at least one cat-sized spider on the ship that she's trying to avoid while she's doing that. So again, the link to Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And a little bit more happens after that, but I didn't actually continue for much beyond that point. Chapter 1 was quite lengthy and I was really enjoying it, but I had more books to read and I was spending quite a bit of time on this one, and I had decided already at this point that I was going to continue with this book, so I really enjoyed it. It's my type of sci-fi. It's very intriguing. I really want to know what happened, whether her brother's still alive, what's caused the problem that has awakened them, why didn't they awaken after 5 years, so where are they? There are so many questions, and that's really good to have in a book like this. So absolutely fine in terms of the writing style. The story was really intriguing. I'm looking forward to continuing this one. And then the last book was my recommendation from Nina. This was Beyond Redemption by Michael R. Fletcher, an author and a title that she's recently found and really enjoyed. Now, I didn't have as good a time with this one as she did by any stretch of the imagination. So we start off this one with a very short prologue. It's about half a page or so. Then we've got a shortish chapter 1 and a not too long chapter 2. And Nina did tell me to read chapter 2 as well to get an idea for the world building and in particular the magic of this world. So that's exactly what I did. The opening chapter has 3 characters on horseback approaching a town, and they're basically sharing a bit of banter, and that's pretty much all that you get there. The banter serves to introduce the characters and tell us what type of people they are. I have seen this in a few different books, and I do generally get on well with this type of opening. And although this is an example of it where it did work quite well, I also felt that I was maybe a little bit slow going for some reason. We then go on to the second chapter and we're introduced to a different character. He's in a room and he's got 3 or 4 doppels, they're called doppelgangers, who are basically manifestations, if I've got that right, of himself. So they look pretty much exactly like him, and they are essentially mirror images or clones of him, where each one of them has just one of his flaws, or as he calls them, his quirks, and they are named thusly as well. So you've got acceptance and abandonment are 2 of these, and he's conversing with them. They seem to be real, they're not just illusions or anything along those lines, although you do have instances where one of them kind of fades into being in front of him, so that's kind of weird both in terms of the language used. Normally I would expect fading out, but it is quite descriptive to show this new character, this new doppel just kind of forming, coalescing out of the air, I guess, in front of him. So it's a little bit kind of weird, but I'll admit that's as far as I got. I didn't explore it any further to learn a bit more about these doppels and these manifestations. It's quite an interesting concept, but there was one thing that really didn't work for me here. So throughout the prologue, the opening chapter, and kind of however far through the second chapter I got, I found myself quite distracted, or if I'm being honest, I was allowing myself to be distracted, which is never a good sign, because that's telling me that the story isn't doing a good job of drawing me in. Now, I think the main issue that I had with this was the language. So every so often you've got place names or ranks or character names which are essentially in German, and they're in the kind of stereotypical German where you've got a single word to describe a concept, which leads to quite a long polysyllabic word, which for someone like me who doesn't speak German kind of led to me being tripped up every so often as I was trying to get my head around the pronunciation of these words. And it just really stopped me from getting into the flow of reading this book, because you're talking several times a page, maybe once or twice per paragraph that you would have these words. So it was just impossible for me to read it kind of comfortably. Every so often I was just taking my eyes off and looking around because I wasn't getting sucked in, because I just wasn't getting anywhere with the writing. So that one definitely spoiled it, and I did decide to put the book down there. It did mean that it's not one that I'm going to be looking to continue, because I just don't feel like I'd be able to get on with it. I have seen the glossary of this book, and it is absolutely full of words that I really struggled with and that really spoiled my enjoyment. So I think it's a good idea for me not to continue this one. Of the other books, I definitely had a couple that I think could become favourites. I will absolutely continue reading Iron Truth, and also the 13th Hour I had quite a good time with. A couple of the others like Sky in the Deep and Master of Sorrows I was definitely intrigued by and could continue with, and we'll have to see how it goes for those two. But definitely Iron Truth and the 13th Hour are ones that I'll be looking to read the whole book for. So that's how I got on anyway, with blind reading the opening chapter or 2 of the 7 books that my patrons nominated for me. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of these books, if you've read any of them or if you're looking to read them. What are you expecting? Did my description of the openings of these books help you make a decision on whether to read them or not? Whilst you're down there, do the usual liking and subscribing for this video if you've appreciated it and you want to see future content from me. Check out the links in the description box below to all of my social media, including my book club Discord and my Patreon, where if you'd like to join us in either of those, we'd love to have you involved. I'll hopefully see you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.